Hi, this is Tom Soane and welcome to another episode of The Anonymous Landlord. And this one's a drive-by for you because earlier on I was asked the question, would I rather buy 10 houses for £100,000 each or 5 houses for £200,000 each? Now that's a really good question because that makes you really consider each different component of your investment strategy and what you're trying to achieve through your investment. But also it really makes us identify our comfort zones as well and our comfort levels, if you like, for each component. So what am I talking about with components? Well, look, first of all, we've got to work out the profit on each property. Then there's the risk. You have to take into account the risk as a calculation, i.e. how many of your properties are going to be empty at any one point, what types of tenants you're going to attract, and what level of repairs and maintenance, management costs. All of those sorts of things need to be taken into account, and they are calculations. But then you've got the growth potential or the appreciation of the value of each of those properties. Now, of course, if you're buying 10 properties, let's just say, if you're buying 5 properties or 10 properties actually, then each of those properties is going to be different. You can't just automatically get the same 10 properties. Well, actually you might. If you go to one of those Coronation Street roads in the north, then maybe you might, but you get where I'm going with that. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'm just going to assume they are 10 of the same properties or 5 of the same properties, right? So let's start off with the profit. Now, if you're going to buy a property for £100,000, generally speaking, the rent is going to be around £600, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. In your area, it might be slightly different, but generally speaking, if you buy a property for 100 grand, your rent's going to be 600. Now, your mortgage payment on that is going to be something like, I'm just going to say this as a generic figure, just for the sake of the calculation rather than the actual calculation itself. So say, for an example, your rent on that property is going to be 600, your mortgage payment's going to be about 300 once you've included insurances and all of that sort of stuff. So let's just say 300. It may well be less than that, to be honest with you. It may well be something more like 235, 240. But let's just be easy. So £300 a month on the mortgage, you've got £600 a month rent. So again, I'm not going to include management and maintenance, but that is £300 a month profit. So across the year, each property is going to make you £3,600 times by 10 properties. That is £36,000 a year profit. Nice. You'll take that, right? Every day of the year. 36 grand profit. Nice. Just quickly, by the way, if you're going to buy 10 properties for £100,000 each, then you will need £250,000 in deposits, plus fees, plus things like that. But in deposit money, you're going to need 250 grand, by the way, in cash. Now, so that's your profit on 10 properties that you've bought for £100,000 each for £600 a month rent. Not bad. So let's do the same calculation for 5 £200,000 properties. Now again, around my way, if you're going to buy a £200,000 a month, £200,000 property, you're going to rent it for up to £1,000 a month. And again, I'm being quite general there. There are parts of my area where it's going to be 900, other parts it's going to be 1100, but generally speaking, 200 grand will get you £1,000 a month rent. Your mortgage payment on that's going to be about £600 a month. Do you see what I've done there? Simple. So your profit on that is going to be about £400. So that is £4,800 a year times by 5 properties is £24,000 a year. So right away, 10 properties at 100 grand each wins. Hands down, nearly twice as much profit from those 10 lower priced properties. But before you go and make your mind up of that you're going to go and buy 10 properties for 100 grand, let me carry on, because there's a few more things. Now let's look at, so the profit, right? So your profit is much higher if you buy 10 properties at 100 grand. You're going to make an extra, I don't know what, £12,000 a year in profit. Excuse me. So next we need to look at the appreciation. So you've got your £12,000 a year more if you buy £100,000 worth of properties. Now we're looking at appreciation. So again, let me just give you a very generic figure here. I don't want to go too deep into this because it compounds. It's a compounding calculation. But if your growth in value or your appreciation is 2% of the value every year, let's work it out like that. It might be more, it might be less, but generally speaking, if we go along with 2%, I think that's a safe calculation. So 2% appreciation on a £100,000 house is £2,000 a year. Now again, like I said, that does compound, but for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to do it on £100,000. So 2% of £100,000 is £2,000, right? You all agree with that, hopefully. Times by 10 properties is £20,000 a year in growth across your entire portfolio. And excuse me. And if you had those properties for 10 years, £20,000 a year at 10 years is going to be £200,000 in growth. Nice! You'll take that. So not only have you grown the value of your assets by £200,000, but you've also grown your net, or you've also taken net profits of £36,000 a year times 10, that's 360,000. So generally speaking, if you were very smart with your money, you've made more than £500,000 there. Happy with that? You'll take that. Right. Now, let's do that same appreciation calculation for the 5 properties at 200,000. 2% of £200,000 is £4,000 times by 5 properties, that's £20,000 a year, times by 10 years. Oh, it's the same. It's £200,000 that you've grown the value of your assets by. So add that to your £24,000 a year profit times by 10 years, let's say, 240. So it's less. So actually you've made about £440,000 in profit, or in growth, or in if you're smart with your money and you keep every penny. Now bear in mind, out of that money will be management and maintenance, cost of repairs, compliance, all your gas safety certificates, all of those things that will also have to be taken into account. But for the purpose of this, I'm just calculating it simply. Now, we need to look at the risk. The risk is a calculation because this plays into your comfort levels. So the first part of the risk is empty properties. It is a killer for all landlords. Empty properties suck. So we need to try and avoid that or minimize it as much as we can. Now, the average tenancy on a lower priced property is much less than a higher priced property. So if you've got, for an example, a 3-bedroomed house, then that's going to have a family in it for about 8 years, 8 to 10 years, right? Good. Like a nice big family home, they're going to want to stay there. If you've got, say, a 1 or 2 bedroom small house or flat or something like that cost you 100 grand, the average tenancy is going to be closer to about 3 or 4 years, maybe a little bit more. So therefore, you'll have to replace the tenant twice as much, which means on average, you'll have 1 month, let's say, of empty property per 4 years on your lower price property, and you'll have one empty property for 1 month. You'll have an empty property for 1 month every 8 to 10 years for your bigger price properties, right? Make sense? Good. So you have to take that into account first of all. And if you look at it like this, if you've got 10 properties and you're going to have one property empty, you're going to have an empty property every 4 years. Let's say they're all empty at the same time. That means you're going to have about 20 months, 24 months, whatever it is, across that 10-year period where you're going to have an empty, or 1 month with no rent, right? 2.5 months with no rent. Work it out like that. So you're going to have 2.5 months every 10 years with no rent coming in. So work that out. And if we did that on the lower price properties, you're going to have 10 properties, that's 3,000, 2.5 times every 10 years, let's say. So that's 6, 12, that's £15,000 off your profit. On the bigger properties, you're going to have that same thing once. So that is going to be same thing. So about 4,800 times 2 is 9,600 plus another 2,400 is 11,000, 12,000 quid roughly. 12,000 quid. So you lose less in empty property on the bigger price properties, right? Next thing is the type of tenants. So on the lower price properties, you are more likely to attract first time tenants or younger couples. They are less reliable for their rent income. Sorry guys, but that's just truth. The more reliable ones are the more professional working career people or the longer term renters, the ones that have been renting for a long time reliably. So you're going to attract more secure tenants on the higher price properties. That has to play into your calculation. On the lower price properties, look, I'm not saying you're always going to get bad tenants, but you're just more likely to get a problematic tenant. Look, think of it like this, if you've got a 1 or 2 bed flat, you're more likely to get a young couple that have got together, moving in together for the first time, and there could be some problems. They're more likely to break up, they're more likely to go their separate ways. So you're more likely to have an empty property, right? So what we've done here is calculated your profit, which I think the 10 properties wins, hands down. Then your appreciation, which they're both the same. Then you've got your risk factors, which the higher price properties win, in my opinion. Look, there are other components as well. If you've got a lower rent coming into the property and you have a more serious repair required, like a boiler needs replacing, then that cost of that boiler will account for a lot of your rent. A very high percentage of your rent will be gone for something major like a boiler, or maybe there's a major leak or damp or something like that. That will be a higher amount of your actual rent coming in that's lost. Whereas if you've got a higher rent amount coming in, then it doesn't damage your monthly profit so much. Doesn't take you so long to save up for that boiler through your rent profits. So that's another factor to take into account. So hopefully that helps. Look, my answer to it is definitely 10 properties at £100,000. I'm prepared to take the risk for the higher reward. I don't see it as a major risk, but maybe that's because I own 2 letting agents. So maybe to me, I understand how to mitigate that risk and also how to react to that risk. So for me, it's 10 properties at £100,000 each. So hopefully you're all going to go out and buy 10 properties at £100,000 each, right? If you do, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to help you. Hey, if you want to go and buy 10 properties and you want someone to give you an idea of which properties are good and which are bad and what to look for and what to not look for, then do let me know. I'd be really happy to help with that. I'd like to help that. It's quite an enjoyable exercise. I do it with a guy who literally just wants me to be able to call me to talk through every deal he's looking at, every deal he wants to buy, and to guide him along his strategy, almost like a mentor, so to speak, which is awesome. I'm really enjoying it. It's great fun. So anyway, my name's Tom Soane, and this is the Anonymous Landlord.